On December 19th, 1934, Pete Diamondstone was born in the Bronx, but he spent a majority of his youth in Queens. While his father was a dentist by trade, he was also a socialist by heart. Naturally, Pete followed in the latter. Pete's first job was actually passing out flyers for FDR's final re-election bid at the ripe old age of 9 years old. He later enlisted in the Army at age 20, and he served until 1956. He later enrolled in the University of Chicago and got a JD degree working as a legal aid. Around that time, he would get married to a woman named Doris Lake and would end up having 4 kids. 8 years later, Pete moved to Vermont and started getting involved in political advocacy, rallying for Eugene McCarthy's long-shot bid for the presidency, calling him, quote, the last capitalist I supported. After McCarthy lost, Pete and a group of other Vermonters realized that the two-party system wasn't exactly going to bring the change that they needed, so they formed a new political party called the Liberty Union Party that would be the vehicle for Vermont's new left and combat the dominating Democrats and GOP. Him and the 2 other associates that helped him form the party would become some of their first slates of candidates. The 2 other founders in question being former one-term Congressman William H. Mayer and a young up-and-coming man named Bernard Sanders. Pete and Bernie got really close due to their extremely similar backgrounds, and they frequently had spirited debates with each other, apparently to the point where one of them would say, look, come on, it's getting late, let's just head off to bed. And then, after trying to go to sleep, they both would immediately get back up and then continue to debate until sunrise, which in a way made many people within the party actually think this might be good, because they have 2 young, very passionate people leading this force. So naturally, this means that the party could go to a lot of different places. However, for a multitude of reasons, the party just never really took off. But it wasn't until 1977 when things started taking a bit of a turn for the worst, as Bernie decided to leave the party, as again, it wasn't really going anywhere. What hurt even more so was that not only did Bernie Sanders leave the party, he also sort of abandoned something that Pete and him did see eye to eye on, working 100% outside of the two-party duopoly. While Bernie did remain an independent, he was not necessarily as keen of turning away Democrats as he was prior, flat out endorsing Democrats in a couple of elections. Pete taking both things and seeing them as a betrayal to the movement, going so far as to head to a rally that Bernie Sanders was holding with Walter Mondale and handing out flyers saying, Sanders is a quisling, and personally handing one to Bernie himself. For those who don't know what the term quisling is, it is a term originating from Scandinavian countries, which is basically used as a synonym for traitor. It comes from the surname of a former Norwegian leader, Vidkun Quisling, who was a Nazi collaborator. Yeah, no offense, but literally going up to someone whose family members died in the Holocaust and comparing him to a Nazi, I mean, let's just say it's not a good look. Now, while Bernie would of course find a lot of mainstream success, Diamondstone would continue some success in a relative way himself, remaining a prominent member of the Liberty Union Party and becoming a perennial candidate for literally every single office in Vermont, many of which being against his former friend, Bernie Sanders. As such, it would be foolish to go over every single campaign that he ran. As such, we'll only be going over some of the biggest candidacies that he had, and general things that happened during those candidacies, such as in 1980, when he was arrested after he arrived late to a congressional debate and refused to leave the area. A similar incident happened to him in 1996. 2000 was arguably Diamondstone's biggest electoral accomplishment, as he actually managed to snag the Democratic nomination, giving him more credence to his candidacy. He still didn't win, not even his largest vote percentage, but it was still notable. 6 years later, he sought the open Senate seat and made a name for himself at the debate by calling some teens in the audience shits for directing more questions to Sanders and Rich Tarrant as opposed to him, as well as interrupting those 2 aforementioned candidates to the point where he was escorted out of the debate area. As you can see, Pete was definitely not shy of speaking his mind. And this was not lost on people, even among his, I guess, enemies, you could say. Former Senator Jim Jeffords calling him colorful, and Liberty Union Party member Jerry Levy saying, Peter basically has kept the party alive all these years. He's a kind of conscious of the left in Vermont, sticking to his style. Of course, he sacrificed a type of conventional success that politicians strive for, and he may have some doubts about what he's done. His 2014 run for governor also became notable, mostly due to the debate performances of many of the candidates, himself included.
I am a revolutionary, nonviolent socialist, and I am a secessionist. If a student goes to school and learns 2 and 2 is 4, that student has contributed to the wealth of the society and should be paid. What do you call a person who gets room and board for their work? Slaves.
How would you improve wages in the state, Mr. Diamondstone?
Start with the people of the state of Vermont rising up and taking over every major industry. And notice, there was no heroin in the United States when the Taliban were in control in Afghanistan, which if you use your head tells you how it gets into this country through the United States government. Everybody, but we need to tax the people at the top to pay for it. Now they don't pay their fair share of taxes. Let's make them pay their fair share in Vermont. And if that doesn't work, we can secede and do it that way. So we have to stop the military, zero military budget, close all the bases, stop the factories that build all that equipment and ship it off to the Zionist regime so that it can defend itself against the gigantic Gazan military.
The question was about reforming the Department for Children and Families.
Diamondstone, however, would mostly remain a sort of Vermont thing, much like, again, his former associate, Bernie. However, in 2015, when Bernie initiated his presidential campaign, all of a sudden, Pete Diamondstone was getting a ton of calls to do interviews. As a way to sort of see, like, where did Bernie Sanders come from? Like, where did he get his start in politics? A similar thing happened with a bunch of other, like, smaller socialist parties all of a sudden getting interviews after Bernie Sanders became prevalent. And most, if not all of them, including Pete, reiterated a similar point, how they didn't feel that Bernie Sanders was, to their view, a true socialist. Pete again reiterating certain critiques that he had with Bernie in the past, usually revolves to a foreign policy situation, and making it clear that he didn't support Bernie, but would instead be supporting Gloria La Riva's campaign. But one question the media asked him was, do you actually have all of these critiques about Bernie, or are you just jealous that he got famous and you didn't? To which Pete answered truthfully, maybe there's some of that in me, I have to recognize it, because it could have been me. If I changed my views in order to get more votes, I watched that happen to Sanders, and I hated that in him, and I would hate it in myself if it was me. Coincidentally, the same year that Bernie would be on the ballot, Pete would also be on the ballot, initiating a campaign against Vermont's other senator, Patrick Leahy, where again, they kind of tied him to Bernie in a lot of ways. However, that ended up being his last run as he passed away on August 30th, 2017. Upon his death, Bernie released a statement about Pete, which I will show in full.
I first met Peter Diamondstone over 45 years ago. While I have not had a real contact with him for many, many years, I have the feeling that he never changed. Peter was a very independent thinker, unafraid to express his often controversial point of view on any subject. As a result, he forced people to examine and defend their own positions. No small thing. In his own way, Peter played an important role in Vermont politics for many decades.
Peter Diamondstone is a very fascinating figure. And you may understand why, because throughout this whole episode, I kept mentioning Bernie. Pete Diamondstone is sort of a reflection of Bernie. Like I said, they had a lot of similar situations growing up. They have a lot of similarities in sort of changing Vermont politics. In their respective fields, they're regarded as sort of like the far left radical. But the difference between the two would, I think, be that Bernie Sanders is sort of the one that grew up, quote unquote. Peter is sort of what would have happened if Bernie Sanders never adapted. And while Pete still has a very prominent place in Vermont politics, literally, if you're in Vermont, look at your ballot whenever the next election happens, or when your current election is happening, you will probably find a Diamondstone still on the ballot. The Liberty Union Party is still around, albeit under a new name. It's still there and still noticeable, albeit to a lesser quantity. But just because of that doesn't mean that Pete should be forgotten. Far from it. But anyways, that's pretty much all I have to say on this topic. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click that bell to notify when a future video when it comes out. And for some more content from me, you can go to our website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.
Hey man, how is it coming? Remember how when I'm gonna in when he ate and after burning the old when I don't have a longer part open up when I and we juice hidden let on what have all the clear or is to have well and it or no heads up now we are in the pole it out the of is in the head down in the bed and can head the bed on it come no is and the and the well it blows to it and I let them in the photo so that in the open it can the less no net of and I let go the in the no it was a once head held it well it didn't let it wasn't don't not let me come back in head so little it came down at the head it rolled it so let it back now and the insignificant but it only upset of the in head wind and the hand it hit net so it didn't let it in the net and the hand well in head and it blow it the three hotel consider his no let of up to only out the whole let where your own head let out